Moving on, our next speaker for today, we have Mr. Mitul Jain, SRE Capability Lead from Adidas. Mitul Jain, Director Software Engineering, works at Adidas India Technology Hub in the role of SRE Capability Leader. He brings rich experience in SRE, DevOps, and automation while architecting various solutions, models, frameworks using cutting-edge innovative technologies. He has significant exposure in implementation of SRE and DevOps practices for multiple customers in consumer goods, BFSI, travel and transport, telecom, manufacturing domains. Having more than 19 plus years of experience, he has worked for some of the large customers like Fidelity, SITA, Countrywide Financial, Michelin, and Sony Ericsson, among others. This topic for today is Site Reliability Engineering Error Budget, Relevance to Business and Technology.
Hi, I'm Mitul Jain, and I'm the Director of Software Engineering at Adidas in the role of SRE Capability Lead based out of the India Technology Hub. My key interest areas are around digital transformation, specifically around DevOps and SRE. And today I'm going to talk around one of the important topics in error budget, which is used for regulation within site reliability engineering space and its relevance into business and tech. Right. So first I'll talk about what do we see from a tech lens, the error budget, and how do we see it from a stability and a speed perspective. Then I'll go on to talk around the business context to it. How does the business view more specifically from the customer experience? Then we talk about how to get why do we need to get the business buy-in into regulation and reliability. Further, we talk about how do we incentivize the business into regulating their budget. Specifically, there is one key resistance from the business perspective around error budget, and that is something that we'll talk about. How do we tackle that from a consumer impact? There are a couple of dimensions around consumer impact and the consumer happiness index that is an outcome of the error budget. That is something that we'll talk about. How do we ensure the consumer happiness is intact by regulating it? And finally, the key takeaways, which I'll talk at the end of the session. Let's start off with the tech lens. So tech lens is essentially around stability and reliability, and key metrics being availability and latency. Foundation of site reliability engineering relies on ensuring stability, reliability to systems, applications and infrastructure running on production, which impacts consumers transacting for goods and services. Now, deviation in availability, latency, or error rate or any other SLIs of these systems has a direct impact on the top line, which is the revenue of many digital organizations. As a reactive measure, organizations measure stability via MTTX, which is mean time to detect, and MTTR, which is mean time to restore. And there are many other MTT metrics like MTTA, mean time to acknowledge, and continuously endeavor to improve on those by leveraging automation, knowledge base, and adopting AI ops. Essentially moving from reactive to proactive to predictive. So AI ops, when we talk about AI ops, essentially we are talking about predictive operations. Site reliability engineers are focused to maintain these foundational elements within acceptable limits. Now, while on one hand we spoke about stability and reliability, On the other hand, it's equally important, again, from a tech lens, to speak around speed and customer experience as well as competitive advantage that speed brings from a development perspective. Yeah. And one of the key metrics tied to speed is around velocity, which is the speed at which we churn out features. Now, in today's digital mobile first world, over 80% of organizations expect to compete majorly on customer experience. Taking into consideration the cutthroat business environment, businesses cannot wait for several months to release their new features into the hands of their ever demanding customers, thereby ensuring competitive advantage over peers. Now, the more features that are released, the more we are enticing the customers in the digital world to actually go on our e-commerce platforms to purchase our goods and services. Now, there are organizations which launch various campaigns, various events on the digital platform, which really bring customers to the forefront and increase traffic. So these events are extremely important. Thus, software release rollout frequency is constantly under pressure to increase. Engineers, that is developers, are continuously rolling out new features, basis market insights from business, enhance customer experience. Now, while quality of these features is important, which is, of course, that is another topic that we measure, embed DevSecOps into the pipeline, speed at which changes are rolled out is equally important. And between stability and speed, how does the error budget really work is something that we are going to talk about in the subsequent slides. How do we regulate error budget from stability perspective as well as a speed perspective is something that we will talk about. And while stability and speed are both equally important, businesses are laser focused on revenue. Of course, businesses are typically more inclined toward revenue and profitability, which in turn is their target, and which is ultimately derived and as a result of stability and reliability of digital platforms as well as the cutting edge features which are released to entice the customers, which lead to increase in market share. Hence, striking the right balance between consistency, that is again stability, and pace, which is speed, is of paramount importance. Typically, error budget is captured from a technical perspective as a tolerance benchmark between availability, latency, etc., and ensures balance between stability of the production environment and velocity of new features being released. Should error budget be viewed from a stability lens or a speed lens, or for that matter, a business lens, or a combination of all three, is what we're going to talk about in this session, and what is really the impact of error budget on all three, not just the business, but all three from a stability, reliability, and a profitability perspective is what we are going to look. Now, before we move into the customer impact, which we will talk later, let's talk a little bit about how do we, or what are the dimensions on which business needs to be given buy-in from a regulation and a reliability perspective. Yeah. Now, typically in operations and in SRE, we are pretty much event or incident driven, which means that so there are multiple incidents that occur every now and then, and we are reactive to those incidents. Alert fatigue harms even well-seasoned teams. So the operations teams are neck deep into resolving incidents, to respond to incidents and events. This is the effect of receiving too many alerts, either because there are too many incidents or because monitoring is picking up on insignificant issues, also known as noise. This lowers the team's cognitive capacity, making incident response more difficult. It can also lead to your team to ignore crucial alerts, resulting in major incidents going unresolved or unnoticed, thereby impacting business buy-in. So when there are multiple incidents and a plethora of incidents that are impacting the production environment, and when we don't have the alerting framework tweaked in such a way that we can ignore the noise, those incidents in turn impact the business, in turn impact the platform, in turn impact the availability, the latency, and hence it's even more difficult to get the business buy-in to actually regulate around error budget. Now, if there are so many incidents that are already there in the environment, and we go ahead as SREs to ask for regulation around error budget, there's a high chance that business will deprioritize that. The second dimension is around reliability. Now, reliability essentially, if you really care more about several nines of availability than releasing new features, then innovation stops. So clearly, there is a trade off between ensuring high availability and releasing new features. Sure, it might be better to conserve, be conservative than to take the risk. But let's face it, no one would care about the reliability if our system doesn't provide any value. Now, if, for example, think of a scenario that we are laser focused on availability and we don't release features, yeah, for a certain period of time, what would be the additional value that the business would generate by getting new customers? I, as a customer, why would I go to a particular platform if I don't see anything new out, any new feature out? Either it could be from the payment side or the payment gateway or the check-in or the cart or any of the user journeys in the e-commerce platform. There are always trade-off, but keeping systems static won't keep our customers happy and hence impacting the business buy. And the third aspect, of course, is around the risk. Yeah. So the IT project management process itself is flawed. For example, most applications have an uptime goal, a percentage of uptime where the application is expected to be available. About less than 2% of the businesses typically even ask what would happen if the uptime percentage was lower, much less quantified the consequence of the change like that. Even fewer businesses estimate the benefit of better app availability. Now let's take an example here. When suppose we have maintained an availability of 4 nines, yeah, 99.99, and assuming, let's say, we have an error budget of 0.01%. On a given period, if our availability goes down to 99.98 or 97, what is really the differential impact on the business? That is really minuscule. Now, if we were to really hold on to the releasing of new features because of that 0.01 drop below the tolerance for an error budget, then I think that is too much to ask. And hence, it is extremely difficult to get business buy around these dimensions. So these are the key dimensions because of which it becomes extremely difficult for organizations to get business buy-in and typically SREs to drive regulation in a digital world. Yeah. So let's look at how do we as SREs incentivize the regulation. Why not look at, we understand why the business is opposing the regulation. How do we incentivize the executives? Yeah. Now, first is, of course, the competitive advantage. Now, protecting customer experience compared to competitors and thereby increasing customer loyalty is the number one target that all businesses have. The more reliable the system, the seamless the customer experience right from the landing on the homepage to transacting for goods and services. So think of it, if we go to Amazon.com and we have a seamless experience right from the landing onto the .com site, picking our product, checking into adding it to the cart, doing the checkout, paying it via the card, and we get the delivery on time. So that experience itself is fairly, if it is seamless and if it is very reliable, most of the times, then it is really something that would entice the customer. Simple, flawless experience enables return of customers to the platform, thereby increasing revenue and profitability. Of course, I mean, if I as a customer would have such an experience again and again and again, I would certainly not go to any other platform because I know that a particular platform is more reliable and has serviced my needs onto the target. The second dimension of incentivizing is the distributed systems. Now, gone are the days of monolithic architecture and legacy architecture, where we used to have tightly coupled programs and systems. Yeah. So with the growing complexity of tech stacks and dependency on microservices, as we move toward a world of complex distributed systems, the way we operate must evolve to support that. Embedding observability across the value chain and tech layers, each endpoint is important to get the customer experience intact and working. As an example, a similar example I'll take of Amazon.com. Right? Now I go to the landing page, I select a product, I add to cart. Unfortunately, it's the functionality of add to cart is not working correctly. Yeah. While the landing is super good, product selection is super good, adding to my cart is not all that great. What would be my experience? It would, of course, be incomplete, be flawed, and obviously I will look at other competitor websites to see if I can get a similar product. Hence, embedding observability at each endpoint is of great importance. Yeah. In fact, we need to embed, so in the microservice architecture, we should be embedding observability at each endpoint, be it each of the microservices, right from the presentation layer, right to the database layer. So you have the presentation layer, the API, the service layer, the data layer. Each of these layers should have observability embedded to get a seamless experience. Of course, this is a slightly technical, but we can explain this to the business in a very simple way by following a user journey, as I just explained before. Hence, embedding observability across the value chain and tech layers, each endpoint is important to get the customer experience intact and working. And the third dimension to incentivizing regulation is user experience. If a user can't access your service or has a degraded experience, then features are really irrelevant. Now, I might have put in some amazing features like chatbots, self-service, etc. on my website, on my platform. But if the user cannot access those services, how relevant are they? Reliability is really the foundation that all other features are built upon. Reliability should be embedded and right from the planning to the software, to the end stage of the software development lifecycle, and not as an afterthought before moving to production. So while I've been talking on these three dimensions around reliability, mind you, this directly impacts regulation. Only when we are able to measure the reliability of our platforms would we be able to regulate platforms? Would we be able to regulate the error budget based on those SLIs and SLOs? Now that we've spoken about how do we incentivize the business, what is the key resistance to reliability and hence the regulation? Typically, business is viewed in form of numbers, and those are targets which directly impacts the business performance, be it profitability, be it revenue. It directly impacts the business performance, and that is how business performance is really measured. Yeah? Be it digital, and why it doesn't equal to reliability. Now, often executives feel that reliability is more around the platform being reliable. Why? How can we really correlate that to the performance? Of course, it's not an apple to apple correlation. It's not an apple to apple similarity, but it does have a direct indirect impact on business performance. What this will come down to is company priorities. Executives might not see the link between business performance and reliability. This is because incentives are often aligned towards a product innovation. So the more the features we roll out, the more the business performance. So if I go back to the SDLC life cycle where a product owner really defines the requirements, those requirements are really coming from the business. And those requirements are essentially built on a business need with a business case. And hence those requirements are developed and rolled out. And hence we see that business performance is directly linked to innovation. So it may be difficult to convince the business that the SRE should be a company level priority. However, emphasizing on the various facets of consumer impact, business buy-in could be achieved. So we just spoke about the resistance or what are the difficulty we get in business buy-in. Here we spoke about the resistance that business has to regulation and reliability. Now, really, all of this ends up impacting the consumer. If we don't have regulation, if we don't have regulation for reliability, it really impacts the business and the customer. And that is what is on the next one. So at the center of the consumer impact is really the consumer happiness index. Yeah. And why is that? So I will talk around the four dimensions that are here. Essentially, the first dimension is around cost of downtime. Think of a platform being not available. Yeah. No one is able to transact. Of course, it has a direct impact on the consumer happiness. It has a direct impact on the business in terms of revenue and profit. So quantifying the cost of downtime and estimate a bottom time for reliability impact is what is really needed. Convince business. So the first thing that we need to really do is have a direct link of the cost of downtime to the business as well as to the consumer happiness and to the bottom line. The second one is NPS to reliability correlation. Now, NPS has or a net promoter score or a consumer survey's net promoter score has a direct impact on reliability. Yeah. So we should project NPS alongside a detailed customer satisfaction survey, correlate the score with the reliability. Over a period of time, organizations do take customer satisfaction survey on their digital platforms. We should correlate that NPS with the reliability graph over a period of time and try to infer as to the periods where the system or where the platform was not reliable and those periods where the customer survey or the NPS score had a dip. Third one is around competitive advantage. So executives should be shown the SLO metrics to explain how they are to set optimized performance for most part of the important parts of the user journey, and report on incidents that highlight risk areas and hence consumer impact. Build a map of all areas of consumer impact which could have been prevented with this knowledge. So both are interlinked, competitive advantage as well as reactive mode. Now, going from a proactive to a reactive mode, wherein we infer from the past data of downtimes, we built in knowledge through AI ops and be more proactive and suppress incidents from coming up, is where we bring in more reliability. We bring in more competitive. We become more competitive to the external world. And to our consumer happiness index is an outcome of all these dimensions impacting consumer experience. So essentially, what we are saying here is that with measuring the cost of downtime, which with correlating our NPS to our reliability, with being more reactive rather than proactive, and in fact, even predictive from an AI ops perspective, we can gain from the competitive advantage and which has a direct impact on consumer index. And all these dimensions should be measured and should be reflected on the business scoreboard. How do we ensure this consumer impact and consumer happiness is really taken care of? Let's take an example of availability as a measure for stability and lab. As we all know, SLI is service level indicator, carefully defined quantitative measure of some aspect of the level of service that is provided. In our example, as we see that availability is at 97% in Q2. And of course, in the other quarters, it is above the target. SLO, as we know, is a service level objective and a target value or range of values for a service level that is measured by an SLI. In our example, the availability target that we have set is 99%. By that measure, of course, error budget would be 1 minus the SLO, which is 1%. Now in quarter two, we see the error budget was in red because the SLI was 97%. And while in Q1, Q3, and Q4, the error budget was in green. Same measure can be derived for latency, error rate, and other SLIs as well. Now, if we look at a hard look at this graph, a dip of 2 percentage points, yeah, we are looking at regulating our error budget. How much of a business impact does a 2 percentage point have on around availability for a certain period to the business? Is there going to be lesser traffic? Is there going to be consumer unhappy? Or is there going to be unavailability of our services? So I think we really need to look at those dimensions as well. And hence, regulating an error budget is really not a single team or person's responsibility. It is really a combined responsibility, and it should be viewed from a combined lens of business, speed, and stability. And in fact, that is really needed to have a holistic view to regulate the error budget. Combination of all three ends up impacting consumers, and hence the regulation of error budget is a combined effort. So as I said, when the SLI is above the target, development and SRE teams would certainly capitalize. And this is really a recommendation in this topic, that when an SLI is above the target, development and SRE teams should capitalize on the window to release new features, defects, work on reducing tech debt, improve performance, stability, security via non-functional requirements, which is in parts. Of course, if it is above the SLI, we have the liberty to release new features and thereby entice the customer, as well as ensure that the platform is stable by working on stability and reliability, as well as working on the defects. When the SLI is below the target, development and SRE team channelize their energies onto work on defects, reducing tech debt, improving performance, stability, and security by NFOs, thereby bringing back SLI above the target and error budget is green. Okay? Now, the reason why this recommendation is to remove the features when the SLI is below the target is because the focus there should be to bridge that 2 percentage point gap between 97 and 99, thereby ensuring that we are back above the SLO target. Yeah. Not that we will not be releasing features, of course we will be, and the whole idea, the general notion in the industry is that error budget regulation enforces to stop releases. My view is it shouldn't be used to stop releases. It should be used to selectively pick release elements, for example, release features, defects, tech debt on NFR, to actually regulate the error budget and ensure there is a continuous flow of changes that are going on to production. Even the NFR and the stability and reliability ensures that the customer experience is good. So the error budget is in green. When teams do not release new features, however, they do work on stabilizing the platform, thereby ensuring customer experience is intact. And as I said, even though they are not releasing new features, customer experience is intact, and that is what is really ensured. Summing it up, so we spoke first from the tech lens. Then we went on talk around the business lens of regulation, error budget, liability. Then we spoke about why does the business need to have the buy-in and what are the bottlenecks to that? How do we incentivize the business? How do we incentivize the business to really pick on reliability as their number one feature and take that as a priority? And then we went on to talk about why does business does not equate their performance to reliability and how we can tackle that by looking at it from a consumer impact and the consumer happiness index. How do we ensure the consumer happiness index via error budget, by regulating our error budget, by regulating our SLI, SLOs is something that we've already looked. In the end, what are really the key takeaways? In the fast-paced digital world where new features need to be released to enhance customer experience and gain competitive advantage, error budget should be seen as a business metric, a yardstick, which correlates on one hand to consumer happiness index, which we just spoke about, which stems from reliability and stable platforms for trading commodities, and on the other hand, ties customers with new features or capabilities on the platform, which in turn leads to consumer return repurchase from the platform. So on one hand, we should make the business a key stakeholder, a decision maker for error budget. And on the other hand, we should also tie it to business outcomes. So business error budget is clearly centered around the business being the key stakeholder, supported by development and SRE as regulators or regulation around error budget, having a direct impact business outcomes. Again, it's extremely important to tie error budget regulation to business outcome, else the entire regulation really falls flat. Thank you for listening, and here are my coordinates for any questions. Thank you.